The first water well to strike fresh water at 800 feet on Galveston Island was just a few hundred feet in that direction. Once this fresh water was struck, the marketing campaigns ensued. I know I get comments saying that I neglect the west end of the island, but I think you guys are gonna like this one. Today, I am at the Galveston Island State Park, exploring what once became the city of South Galveston, a cream resident suburb. Welcome to Galveston Unscripted. Thank you to our video sponsor, The Daily News, bringing you the news since 1842, Texas' oldest newspaper. Support your local newspaper, The Daily News. Since I'm driving all the way out to the west end for you guys, I might as well take the time to talk a little bit about South Galveston. These days, we're pretty used to having housing developments all over the island, extending from the east end all the way to the west end. But back in the 1800s, that was not the case. The west end was pretty quiet, not much going on. A lot of coastal prairie, a little bit of ranching. Most of the development on Galveston Island prior to the 1900 storm was on the east end of the island surrounding the port. And it kind of makes sense. Back then, there weren't as many ways to commute to work. If you were working at the port, you wanted to be as close to the port as possible. Same goes for your storefront or factory job. Considering South Galveston was never the flourishing residential suburb that the investors dreamed of, finding historical documentation for this specific topic was pretty difficult. But we do have a map and newspaper clippings from around the country. Today, I am at the Galveston Island State Park, exploring what once became the city of South Galveston. Throughout the 1800s, as the port of Galveston became the powerhouse of the Texas economy, the city of Galveston was growing and expanding in population and development, but that was mainly on the east end of Galveston Island. Most of the west end of Galveston Island was either uninhabited or ranch land. And considering the elevation of Galveston Island was extremely low before the seawall and grade raising, it was difficult to get residential or commercial development going down here on the west end of the island. Now, talking about west end development in Galveston in the 1890s, there was actually a lace factory right at 11 Mile Road. That was called the Nottingham Lace Factory. South Galveston's story involves finding fresh water on Galveston Island for Galvestonians. Being able to source fresh water on Galveston Island in 1891 was extremely important. Prior to a water line being built over the causeway from the mainland, Galveston had a difficult time sourcing fresh drinking water. Much of the fresh water was collected in rainwater cisterns or had to be shipped in from other places on boats or trains. And it wasn't until 1895 that there was a freshwater line run from Alta Loma, which is right near Santa Fe, Texas, down to Galveston Island from an artesian well. Alta Loma basically means high land. The other part of the story has to do with a group of businessmen from Denver, Colorado, who wanted to invest in land here on Galveston Island, as they knew the ship channel was set to be deepened and widened and become the premier port on the Gulf Coast of Texas. I am walking on a trail near the western portion of the Galveston Island State Park, which was once set to be the center of South Galveston. And why would this be the center of South Galveston? Because the first water well to strike fresh water at 800 feet on Galveston Island was just a few hundred feet in that direction. That first freshwater well was dug in 1891. And once this fresh water was struck and could be provided to Galvestonians, the marketing campaigns ensued, dubbing this area as South Galveston. The South Galveston Land Company was established in 1891, and they began promoting all over the United States for people to invest in South Galveston. And many of the men who bought shares in South Galveston had never even been to Galveston or seen where South Galveston was set to be. Actually, many of those investors had never even set foot in Texas. The South Galveston Land Company was actually formed in Denver, Colorado. We can even see on this document of foreign investment for the state of Texas that $500,000 for the South Galveston Land Company was from Colorado. Now, these businessmen kind of had a leg up and a little bit more information than most. Those Denver businessmen had been petitioning for the deepening and widening of the Galveston ship channel, which could only boost Galveston's economy, meaning there could be an influx in population here in Galveston, or a general influx of investment driving the prices up, including the price of real estate. which is why this entire tract of land was purchased by the investment company, because they wanted to make money. The South Galveston Land Company took out ads in the Galveston Daily News promoting land sales in South Galveston, calling it a future flourishing manufacturing center and a cream resident suburb of Galveston. The South Galveston Land Company set up their offices in the Tremont Hotel building, one of, if not the premier hotel on the island, really putting on an air of confidence and enthusiasm for this land development. And each lot sold between $35 and $130 a piece. The developers of South Galveston were even making plans to build a causeway from the northernmost point of South Galveston over the shallow waters of Galveston Bay to connect the city of South Galveston to the mainland. Galveston Island State Park is roughly 10 miles away from downtown Galveston, which in the 1890s is quite a long commute if you were planning on living in South Galveston and working in downtown Galveston. Well, they had an answer for that. The South Galveston Land Company began to build a railroad from Galveston out to South Galveston, promising short commute times. They even promoted excursions for Galvestonians to come view the land out here on the proposed site. The excursions that the South Galveston Land Company would set up, they would give away tickets to a free train ride out to the lots of South Galveston, hoping to sell land or one of the 5,000 shares to the South Galveston Land Company, looking to boost the value of the land or the shares. In a recent interview with Galveston Island State Park Superintendent, Mr. Kyle O'Haver, we talked a little bit about South Galveston. Have you ever heard of South Galveston? Have you ever heard the name of that?
I absolutely have heard of South Galveston, yeah. The area that we call Jenkins Bayou, because the town of South Galveston is actually easiest to see out there. And the town of South Galveston was laid out in the prairie area that is on the west side of our park, the big open expansion that was between us and Jamaica Beach. There's still some trails and areas out there that you can hike that are very straight lines, and you're like, why would a park, most of the time they're meandering? Well, the reason is we're following old road beds that were the town of South Galveston. There was multiple areas where there was businesses and houses laid out on those streets. The end of Park Road 66, there was supposed to be a very large hotel that sat out there. What we have now as a state park almost wasn't.
Now, while walking on these trails at Galveston Island State Park today, you may be wondering what happened to South Galveston. Why is there no city of South Galveston on this tract of land today? Well, the South Galveston Land Company kind of hit trouble a little bit early. Now, the elevation of this land is extremely low. Galveston Bay is just right over there. I'm probably at only 1 or 2 feet above sea level where I'm standing, where this would pretty much be the center of South Galveston. Advertisements for South Galveston were pushed and promoted across the country. They were essentially promotions for investors. Now, as you can imagine, back in the 1890s, it was pretty difficult to get people to buy land on the west end of Galveston Island, as there was really nothing there yet. How would you get your groceries? How would you get to work? Even if you had the convenience of riding a train for 10 miles to Galveston, would you do that? It might be easy for us to say yes today, as many of us commute to and from Houston to go to work every day. But back then, that wasn't so much the case. The South Galveston Land Company didn't have trouble selling the shares to invest in the property. Where they had the trouble was selling the lots. South Galveston was set to have a premier hotel and even zoological gardens right near Lake Como. That hotel was never built. The South Galveston Land Company ran into trouble funding their operations and couldn't quite get the investment they were looking for. So growth of South Galveston was quite slow through the 1890s. And as you may have guessed, what brought the end to development at South Galveston was the 1900 storm on September 8th, 1900, striking Galveston and killing over 6,000 people and wiping out thousands of buildings. And just looking at the elevation out here today, you can only imagine that the water was completely covering this side of the island. And in my research, I can find very few references to South Galveston after 1900. Today, the Galveston Island State Park is a haven for migrating birds, and it is a world-renowned destination for birders, where people flock to from all over the planet to come check out the birds here on Galveston Island. But there is one small remnant we can see of South Galveston today.
The pond at the very end on the right-hand side of Jenkins Bayou was at one time a pond that was supposed to have a big fountain in the middle of it for the town of South Galveston.
Now, right here adjacent to the parking lot at the Jenkins Trailhead, we have this pond right here, Alta Loma Pond, right in the center of Alta Loma Park, the town center for the city of South Galveston. The city and port of Galveston and Denver, Colorado are connected in many ways. South Galveston was not the only place that businessmen in Denver began to invest in Galveston Island. And if you want to know more, go check out the Denver to Galveston video. The link is in the description. As I walk through the Galveston Island State Park and enjoy some of the last coastal wetlands that we have on the island, bringing us back to what it would have looked like prior to any settlement here on the island at all, I'm kind of glad that South Galveston didn't play out. As you look on either side of the Galveston Island State Park, you can see development. And to be able to walk through the Galveston Island State Park and know that I can bring my kids here to enjoy nature, it really highlights how close Galveston was to developing most of Galveston Island prior to the 1900 storm. And I'm really glad I'm not walking through a developed neighborhood here on the west end of Galveston. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on all social media. We are everywhere. And if you haven't yet, go check out the podcast. We've got hours and hours of historical content on that podcast feed. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Galveston Unscripted. People traveling to Galveston to come see these birds, these migratory birds that come through our island. I mean, are there people coming from all over the world, or
Absolutely.
just this area? Yeah.
Literally all over the world. We are a destination not just for the birds, but you know, our history here on the island attracts a lot of people from around the world. We find a lot of people traveling Texas to seek that history. Many of them come to Galveston because it's so rich in the history of not only Texas but the United States. So we see that, but in birders in particular, the upper Texas coast is very legendary.